To the cloud.
Okay.
There we go. Thanks, Bart. Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
Yeah, the last one on New Orleans.
Resume. Okay. Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. And
Good afternoon.
as I was mentioning earlier, it's great to see everybody here, and thanks for joining us. Okay, this is a special meeting for us. It's our kind of half-day memorial seminar, and usually what we do around this time of year, around the time of the assassination, we tend to get together, have a special event to commemorate John F. Kennedy and his life. And usually this takes place in person in a pub called the Green Man, which those of you that are in the UK and come to London will be familiar with. It's a nice little pub. We have a nice few drinks and we discuss the case and John F. Kennedy. And then we go around the corner to where there used to be a bust of John F. Kennedy. Unfortunately, that's been removed now due to vandalism. But we usually go there and say a few words and just take a moment to remember him. So obviously, unfortunately, this year we're not able to do that for obvious reasons. So that's why we thought we'd have this little special half-day event where we have 3 speakers instead of our usual 1. So I'm incredibly grateful to everybody who has agreed to give up their time to address us this afternoon. So from the very start, I want to say a very big thanks to Johnny Cairns, Pete Mellor, particularly you, Pete. Thanks a lot for stepping in at fairly late notice on this. And also our friend across the water, John Williams, who we'll be hearing from later on. We're all really grateful. We're looking forward to hearing what should be a fascinating afternoon's discussion. I just touched on this earlier on. I'm going to make a slight change to the agenda. So what I would like to do is, following each discussion, I'm just going to open the floor for 10 to 15 minutes so people can discuss what they've heard, maybe have a few questions, and then we'll go on to the next speech. Okay, so I'm going to try and limit it to 10 to 15 minutes so we can kind of keep the time. And the aim is we should be wrapping up around 6 p.m. London time, yeah, GMT, which I believe at the moment. There will be a break about 4:15. We'll take a 15-20 minute break. And then at the end, I'm just going to close the meeting by giving a couple of announcements about a couple of events that are coming up in future. So that's the kind of plan for today. And it's great to see everybody here. Thank you all for coming. So let's crack on and go to the first speaker. Now, one of the things that I've heard time and time again throughout my membership of DD Plaza UK is discussions about the Dallas Police Department and how they acted following the shooting. From the description of the rifle, was it a Mauser? Was it a Mannlicher Carcano? What happened to the bullet casings that were found at the scene? What about the palm print that was there or was not there and was there? And there's no doubt that there are some questions that need to be asked and discussed about the way the police department handled the evidence they found there. And that is the subject of our first talk this afternoon. So without any further ado, I'm going to pass you on to Johnny Cairns. And Johnny, thanks a lot for being the first man up.
Anytime. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so as Tony just touched upon there, I'm here to talk about the evidence of the case itself and the subsequent chain of possession for each item. I'll try and get through as much of the evidence as I can, and hopefully you guys learn something. So first and foremost, a lot of people invest in certain theories in this case, whether it's whatever conspiracy theory or the lone nut theory or whatever. I think first and foremost to remember that this is a murder case, and had Oswald not been murdered so brutally 48 hours after the murder of the president himself, then Oswald would have went to court, and all the evidence that the prosecution would have tried to convict him on would have been subject to the rules of evidence. And the various pieces of evidence that the prosecution would have tried to convict Oswald on would have been the rifle itself, it would have been the pan print on the rifle, the shells that were left at the scene. They would have tried to have shown that he carried this paper bag, or as Ian Griggs liked to term it, the paper bag that never was, to the depository that day, and other pieces of evidence as well, like the chain of possession for the president's body and the chain of possession for the limousine also. So I think the first thing that I should really kind of talk about, the chain of possession for CE 399. I think that's the most probably important one for the commission's case. But I think the first thing I'd like to talk about is what the chain of possession is for the rifle prior to 11/22/63, and what proof is there that Oswald actually had this rifle in his possession. Now, obviously, I'm going to talk about the mail transaction, and so basically, the commission speculated that Oswald ordered this rifle and a revolver to his PO box in Dallas, and the PO box was PO Box 2915, and this box was rented in the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, the rifle was ordered in the name of Hadell, and the first thing that we would have to look at in this situation is, was a person by the name of Hadell authorized to receive mail at this PO box in Dallas? Now, if you look at Oswald's application form for this box, there's 3 headings: heading 1, 2, and 3, and part 3 is the one which fascinates me the most, and it's titled "Names of Persons Entitled to Receive Mail Through Box." Now, had Oswald had put down the name Hadell here, then a person by the name of Hadell could have received mail at this box. Well, we can't look at part 3 of Oswald's application because it simply doesn't exist. It was presumed destroyed, and the person who the commission relied upon for this piece of information was a man by the name of Harry Holmes. Now, Harry Holmes was a postal inspector, and actually through Ian Griggs's article for JFK Lancer, The Four Faces of Harry Holmes, we find that Holmes was actually an FBI informant whose family actually contacted Lancer and asked them, basically understanding the context of the times, that to be an FBI informant was a badge of honor. This is what Holmes said, and this is from his testimony. And Wesley Liebler was questioning counsel. And basically, Holmes says, until he relinquishes the box, they pull this out and endorse it, so the box has been closed and the date, and they tear part 3 off and they throw it away. It has no more purpose. This is what happened on box 2915. Then Mr. Liebler asks them, have they thrown part 3 away? And Mr. Holmes goes, yes, as it so happens, even though they closed the box in New Orleans, they still had part 3, and it showed that the mail for Marina Oswald and A.J. Hadell was good in the box. They hadn't complied with the regulations. They still had it there. Now, if you look further on in the testimony, Mr. Liebler asks Mr. Holmes, he says, now, is this regulation that says that section 3 should be torn off and thrown away, is this a general regulation of the post office department? To which Mr. Holmes replies, it is in the post office manual instructions to employees. Yes, sir. Now, what is quite striking about this testimony is this: Holmes never brought the postal regulations to back up what he was saying. And Commission Counsel Wesley Liebler never asked him what postal regulation this was. He never asked him anything like this. So we basically just had Mr. Holmes's word that these were in the post office regulations. Now, a researcher by the name of Stuart Galliner in 1966 wrote to the United States Post Office, and he asked the post office certain questions. He wanted to know which regulations were in place in 1963, which were applicable to the mail transaction in the name of Hadell. And a guy by the name of Ralph Rea, who was head of the Special Services branch, actually wrote back to Mr. Galliner. And Mr. Rea informed Mr. Galliner that 2 postal regulations which were applicable to his question were in place. And the first one was section 846-53H of the Postal Manual provides that the third portion of box rental applications identifying persons other than the applicant authorized to receive mail must be retained for 2 years after the box is closed. So this is in stark contrast to the testimony of Harry Holmes. According to this postal regulation, part 3 of the application form should have been kept for up to 2 years. Now we have another postal regulation, and this is section 355-111B, and this prescribes that the mail addressed to a person at a post office box who is not authorized to receive mail shall be endorsed addressee unknown and return to sender where possible. So if we if we speculate for a second that Oswald never put a Heidel name down on his postal form, then once this package arrived at the Dallas post office addressed to Heidel, it actually should have been stamped addressee unknown and shipped back to Cairns. That's what the regulations state, and that's what should have happened if that package actually arrived at the post office. You know, sometimes people can counter that by going, you know, sometimes things get through in defiance of postal regulations, sometimes packages get through and it happens. Well, yes, that is certainly possible. That is certainly possible. However, there is another thing that a person receiving a mail from a post office, if they're receiving a rifle through the mail, has to do. And that is basically when firearms are shipped. So when Cairns shipped the firearm to the Heidel address at the post office box, then they must have included a form 2162. Now, this form is to be filled out by the receiver of the firearm, okay? And actually, this is stated again in the US Post Office regulations. This is Regulation 846-5-3A, which states delivery receipts for firearms and statements by shippers of firearms, Form 2162 and 1508, should be retained for 4 years. So basically, if this package got through to the post office box, and somehow Heidel had got the notice in his post office box to collect this package, then he would have been asked to fill in the form 2162 or a 1508 form. Now, does a form 2162 or a 1508 exist in the case of Heidel for receipt of this package? It does not. So how are we supposed to believe that it gets through in defiance of one postal regulation, it gets in defiance of 2 postal regulations, and now we're asked to say that it gets to Oswald in defiance of 3 postal regulations? I don't know about you, but I just find that very hard to believe, that all the documented evidence which we should have for this postal transaction, it just simply doesn't exist. So you have no other choice but to arrive at the conclusion that Lee Oswald was not in receipt of this rifle at his post office box. Now, another thing that sometimes gets overlooked is this: where was Lee Harvey Oswald when the rifle was ordered? Now, according to the postmark on the money order, the purchase for the rifle was placed in March the 12th, 1963, around 10:30 a.m. So where was Lee Oswald when this money order was placed? He was at work. He was accounted for at work. And if you look at Commission Exhibit number 1855, it's Lee Harvey Oswald's time card. Now, basically back then, his work schedule, it was basically made up of various jobs that he was completing throughout the day. So it'd be like 9 till 10 o'clock, cleaning printing machines or something like that, you know. And his supervisor would obviously sign this off. Between the hours of 10 and 11, he was actually completing a job at his work. Now, this is strong evidence to suggest that Oswald was not at that post office box. Now, I have been labelled as some that say this is utter nonsense. Oswald simply lied on his time card and he went away and placed that money order. Well, I could just imagine this in a court of law, prosecution coming out with this, for example, and they would say, "Oh, this work time card is wrong because he simply forged it." Now, if I was defence counsel for Oswald, I would be demanding that the prosecution show that and offer proof that he actually did forge this time card. I think the charge from the defendant is baseless speculation, and I think this is strong evidence that Oswald was at work. Now, bearing in mind, if Oswald somehow left work without was AWOL from work, then the question begs, who completed the jobs that was assigned to him for the hours signed off in his name? And of course, any venture to the post office would have taken quite a long time as well. Of course, Oswald didn't have a car, so any any trip to the post office would have been required that he walk it, and that takes a lot of time as well. So I think it's ludicrous to suggest that he actually ordered this weapon, or these weapons, should I say. I know people say that it was his handwriting on the mail order form and all this kind of stuff, but I don't think handwriting analysis is looked upon very skeptically from lawyers. In fact, there's a famous case where there was diaries of Adolf Hitler, handwriting analysis. Experts had viewed these diaries. They said they were genuine, and only down the line did it come were actually forgeries. So I think there's a strong case to be made that the handwriting analysis on the postal money orders are not Oswald's. There is other aspects of it. It's the monetary aspect. The people say that the money was never taken, the gun was never paid for. It's a different type of weapon. Haddell ordered a 36-inch model, while the rifle that's in the National Archives today is a 40.2-inch model. So there's other things like that we've got to take into account. And this is documented well from a few sources, but I think the best is in Martha Moyer's Ordering of a Rifle, Placed through Lancer. That was a great article, and that goes into the mail transaction and just the various problems with it. And I think the most obvious question you'll find is this: if he was planning it, the only way he would order these rifles to himself under an alias would be because he was planning on using them for some criminal deed. I mean, that's the only way you would order untraceable rifle weapons to yourself. So why would he take the mail order route when he could have easily walked into any store, given a false name, and he could have walked out with without any trace? And if it had gone to a court of law again, it would have simply been the sales clerk's word against Oswald's word. And I can't imagine any sales clerk being able to positively identify Oswald as Haddell 8 months after the fact. You know, there is one other thing that I did think of, although I am still researching the probability of it, or the possibility of it just now. And it's this: I came across Lee Harvey Oswald's finances in the commission volumes, and he did have quite a bit of surplus money through in October 1962 when they took the box out, and in March of 1963 when he allegedly ordered the rifle. Now, I came up with the kind of theory, I suppose you would like to call it, is that if he was really wanting to mail order untraceable weapons to himself, why didn't he simply take out a separate Haddell PO box, mail order the rifle and the revolver to this box, and once he was in receipt of these weapons, close the box down and cease the Haddell alias? Because bearing in mind, when Oswald, let's take the commission's official line, Oswald is allegedly leaves the rifle behind after the assassination, okay? But he must know that no matter what, the rifle will be traced back to his name. So it doesn't make any sense. If he had then taken out a separate PO box and ordered the rifle and the revolver to that, he could have then left behind the rifle at the crime scene, and the FBI would have tried to trace the weapon to a person named Haddell who simply doesn't exist. So there is different avenues, and the only way that this weapon was allegedly ordered through mail order was to link it to Oswald. Saying that, there is no way to tell that if this weapon was actually used during the assassination itself. So there is a lot of serious doubt. There is reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt exists that Oswald never ordered this weapon, and in fact, apparently he denied ever owning the rifle as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the rifle itself and what kind of condition it was in prior to 11/22/63, or should I say on 11/22/63. Now, the rifle in pristine condition, even in pristine condition, was a bit of a joke. Okay, there was a lot of people that commented upon the rifle. For example, Dial Ryder, who worked at the Irvine Sports Shop, stated that the Mannlicher Carcano was real cheap, common, It was real flimsy looking, and it was very easily knocked out of adjustment. Basically, a man called John Bringarn, who was owner of the gun shop in Dallas, stated the Carcano was a very cheap rifle and could have been purchased for $3 in each and lots of 25. So it never had a good reputation. In fact, the Italians dubbed it the humanitarian rifle because they actually said that it couldn't hurt anyone on purpose. But I could be doing an injustice here to the rifle on the 6th floor. This could have been the exemplar, this rifle. So let's see what these the men who were test firing the rifle had got to say about it. Now, a man by the name of Ronald Simmons testified before the commission, and Ronald Simmons was of the US Army, okay? And he was basically testifying to the shooting tests, which this rifle was involved in. Now, a questioning counsel was a man by the name of Heisenberg, and he posed this question to Simmons. He said, "Was it reported to you by the persons who ran the machine rest tests whether they had any difficulties with sighting in the weapon?" Mr. Simmons replied, "Well, they could not sight the weapon in using the telescope, and no attempt was made to sight it in using the iron sight. We did adjust the telescope by the addition of 2 shims, which one tended to adjust the azimuth and one which adjusted an elevation. The azimuth correction could have been made without the addition of the shim, but it would have meant that we would have used all of the adjustment possible, and the shim was a more convenient means, not more convenient, but a more permanent means of correction." So I'll just pause that there. What does that mean? Well, simply stated, if Oswald had lived and went to court, and the prosecution was trying to present this rifle as evidence, okay, the defense could have had the rifle thrown out because it is not in its original condition as it was on 11/22/63. It's the US Army refurbished the weapon, so it has basically lost all of its credibility as evidence, and that's massive because the US Army the US Army basically tampered with the most important piece of evidence in this case for the sake of rifle tests, and that would have been huge if Oswald had went to court. There was also more things Simmons testified to with regards to the rifle. He basically said that there were several comments made, particularly with respect to the amount of effort required to open the bolt. He actually said one of the master riflemen, a man by the name of Mr. Staley, had difficulty in opening the bolt in his first firing exercise. He thought it was completely up, and when it was not, and he had to retrace his steps in an attempt to open the bolt after the first round. Now, these are these master riflemen, 3 of the best shots in the whole of the United States, and they are having trouble with working this rifle. It's pretty incredible. And in fact, Simmons also said that the trigger pull was effectively a 2-stage operation, and the experts had great difficulty in opening the bolt, and that they actually tended to move the rifle off the target when they were aiming. You know, now if you think about this here logically, this assassination was accomplished in 6 seconds, okay? And the commission are charging that a man who barely made marksman as a Marine, the lowest rank you can become, had a greater experience and had a greater record with this rifle than these master riflemen. It just begs belief to believe that's even possible. Now, the master rifleman also made this statement. They actually didn't want to fire the rifle just in case they broke the firing pin, because the firing pin on the rifle was rusty and it was disintegrating. And in fact, this information is held in an FBI report from J. Edgar Hoover to General Counsel Lee Rankin, and that's what it states. It basically states that the firing pin on the rifle has been used extensively, as shown by wear on the nose or the striking portion of the firing pin, and the presence of rust on the firing pin and its spring may be an indication that the firing pin has been recently changed prior to 11/22/63. Now, why was the rifle in such bad condition? Well, if we look at this, there's a document and it's Commission Exhibit number 1977, and it is a document in volume 25, I think it is, of the exhibits. And it's basically this information was gathered by the FBI from a confidential informant, and it's about the shipment of the rifles which C2766 was included in. And basically, the rifle in Italy was shipped by a company called the Carlo Rivia Machine Shop, and they were shipping to a company called Adam Consolidated Industries. Okay, and Adam Consolidated Industries was an arm of Klein's, and the FBI informant, the information is in this what do you call it, this exhibit, that the shipment of the rifles, which contained C2766 and shipped to Adams Consolidated Industries, there is presently a legal proceeding by the Carlo Rivia Machine Shop to collect payment for the shipment of the rifles which Adam Consolidated Industries claims were defective. So Adams is basically refusing to pay the Carlo Rivia Machine Shop the money for the shipment, which included the assassination rifle, because Adams is claiming that the weapons were defective, which they were sent. Now, how were the weapons made? Well, the weapons were basically cannibalized, because remember, these weapons were all made in World War II. They were surplus World War II weapons. And basically, there was a man by the name of William Schuer, and he also spoke to the FBI. And William Schuer had bought hundreds of thousands of rifles from the Italian government's surplus cash. And this is what Mr. Schuer said about them. He said, many of these rifles were collected from battlefields or places of improper storage. These weapons were in very poor condition. He also said these rifles were bought by the pound rather than units. Upon arrival in Canada, defective parts were removed, and saleable rifles were sometimes composed of parts of 3 or more weapons. So there is a real possibility that the weapon, the Mannlicher Carcano C2766, was actually cannibalized from 3 or more other defective weapons. Pretty incredible stuff. And in fact, it's reasonable speculation to deduce that that's why the weapon was in such poor condition, and why the US Army had to refurbish it to even test fire it. Now, if you're Lee Harvey Oswald, okay, and you've used this weapon allegedly to try and fire at General Walker, and you miss, how confident are you going to be trying to take that same weapon up to a 6th-floor window and try and assassinate the President of the United States? It's ludicrous. It's a ludicrous notion. And no one would actually pay any attention to it or take it seriously. But there is those that charge that this weapon was the assassination weapon. It's actually quite incredible to think that. So that's and there is other parts of the weapon. Ian Griggs covered this masterfully in his book, No Case to Answer, about the assembling of the rifle. Basically, the commission said that Oswald assembled the rifle with a dime coin, something which has been completely debunked through the fantastic work by Ian. I've said that it's grossly overlooked how this weapon was assembled, and I mean, I think Ian even said that for the sake of like a couple of inches, he allegedly disassembles this rifle. Why wouldn't he just get a bigger bag or make a bigger bag, which was charged by the commission that he did, which he never did. But yeah, it's all ludicrous. And even if you look at Oswald's shooting tests, for example, when he was in the Marines, I'll just read one quote that I think sums it up really, really well. What people thought of Oswald's shooting ability with a rifle, and this actually comes from Henry Hurt's book, Reasonable Doubt, and it's a great line. And this is Henry Hurt actually interviewed a guy called Sherman Cooley, and Sherman Cooley was a fellow Marine colleague of Lee Harvey Oswald's, and he was an expert hunter. And this is what Cooley said. He said, if I had to pick one man in the whole United States to shoot me, I pick Oswald. I saw the man shoot. There's no way he could have ever learned to shoot well enough to do what they accused him of. Take me, I'm one of the best shots around, and I couldn't have done it. And another Marine colleague, a man by the name of James R. Pearsons, he also said that Oswald possessed a lack of coordination that contributed to him being a very poor marksman. And I've heard a lot of this. Oswald had poor coordination. He was a poor speller. And this could all be linked. I don't know if he did have any sort of kind of condition, but I mean, if you think about it, if he had a poor coordination under a simulated rifle test, then what kind of coordination would he have when faced with shooting at the most powerful man in the whole entire world? I can't imagine it being enhanced by that. So yeah, there is definitely other avenues to pursue with regards to the rifle. But I would actually want to move on now and talk about the ammunition for the weapon itself. Now, actually, if I could just say one thing more about the rifle, Wesley Liebler, who was assistant counsel to the commission, stated this in a memorandum. He said, and this was about the shooting tests and about the commission's use of master riflemen in determining if it was comparable to Oswald's shooting ability. This is what Liebler said. The fact that most of the experts were much more proficient with a rifle than Oswald could have ever expected to be, and the record indicates that fact. To put it bluntly, that sort of selection from the record could seriously affect the integrity and the credibility of the entire report. And that was from Assistant Counsel Wesley Liebler, and he even stated that. So yes, if I could just move on to talking about the ammunition. Now, the ammunition is very important as well, because nobody has ever satisfactorily answered the question of where did Lee Harvey Oswald get the ammunition for the Mannlicher Carcano rifle. Now, the Dallas police and the FBI actually investigated this avenue, and the FBI conducted a canvass of all the places of business which fell under the listing of having sold guns and ammunition in the Dallas and Irvine area. These businesses included hardware stores, pawn stores, department stores, sporting goods stores, and Army and Navy surplus stores. Okay, only 2 stores the FBI found were known to have handled the 6.5 Mannlicher Carcano Western Cartridge Company ammunition. These stores were owned by a man called John Thomas Mason, who was owner of Mason's Gun Shop, and the other was a man called John H. Bringarn, and he was owner of the gun shop. These were the only 2 stores that actually sold this ammunition. The FBI visited these 2 stores independently. They produced a photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald to each owner of the store. And first of all, they produced this photograph to Mr. Mason. And Mr. Mason advised the FBI that he was unable to identify this individual as being a person to whom he had previously sold 6.5 Mannlicher Carcano ammunition. He advised that if he had sold more than a box or 2 to any one person, that he would have remembered the sale. He also states that he had never seen Lee Harvey Oswald, had no recollection of his ever having to come into his place of business, and he had never sold any of his ammunition to him, period. So then the FBI, unsuccessful in that attempt to link the ammunition to Oswald, went to the store owned by Mr. Bringarn. And this is what Mr. Bringarn said to them when the FBI produced a photograph of Mr. Oswald. He stated, the memo states, a photograph of Lee Harvey Oswald was exhibited to Mr. Bringarn, and he advised he was unable to identify this individual as being a person to whom he had previously sold 6.5 ammunition. Mr. Bringarn stated he did not know Lee Harvey Oswald, had no recollection of ever seeing him, and did not believe he had sold him any type of this ammunition. So, the only 2 places Oswald could have got this ammunition from, and the store owners are rejecting the FBI's assumption that Oswald must have bought the ammunition from that store. Now, if Oswald had any ammunition on him, or if there was any ammunition ever found in any of his possessions after the assassination, then I could have at least entertained the possibility that he must have got the ammunition from somewhere, because he did possess it. Well, there was two searches made after the assassination of two different addresses which Mr. Oswald allegedly lived at. One was at 1026 North Beckley, and the other was the Payne residence in Irvine. The police searched these two residences. The police never found one box of ammunition for either the rifle or the revolver. They found no stray pieces of ammunition for the rifle or the revolver. And they also found no cleaning products for the weapons, or oil for the weapons also. Now, if the prosecution in this case are trying to say that this man was in possession of the ammunition prior to 11/22/63, then where is there evidence for such a notion? There is no evidence that he ever bought any ammunition, and there's no evidence that he ever had any ammunition in his possession. Now, Sylvia Mager, and before I forget, remember, cleaning products for the rifle would have been needed, because according to Marina Oswald, after the assassination attempt of Walker, Oswald buried the rifle in the ground using his bare hands, and also that the rifle found on the 6th floor was in a well-oiled condition also. Sylvia Mager, to me, is the person that sums up the ammunition question perfectly. And if I can just quote from our book, Excesses After the Fact, because it is a really worthwhile quote. She says this: "The Commission's rationale seems to be that since Oswald used the bullets to shoot the president, it is entitled to assume that he obtained and possessed them. And since he obtained and possessed them, obviously he used them to shoot the president. But this circular reasoning postulates an assassin who, 1, obtained and exhausted a supply of ammunition except for 4 cartridges which remained in his possession on the morning of the assassination. 2, covered his tracks so ingeniously that it was beyond the resources of the local and federal investigators to trace the source of the ammunition, or to trace the expended shells from the largest part of the supply cartridges. And 3, loaded the remaining 4 cartridges into a clip-fed rifle, which can hold 7, firing 3 times with such phenomenal skill as to make the 4th cartridge superfluous. The alternative is that this singular assassin squandered more than $20 of his meager earnings for a rifle, but unable or unwilling to spend a small additional sum for ammunition, stole, borrowed, or found on the street 5 cartridges that just happened to fit the weapon, and that those 5 cartridges sufficed from March through to November 1963 for dry runs, attempted murder, and successful assassination." That to me sums up the whole question of Oswald and the ammunition perfectly. There is, as I say, no evidence to suggest that Oswald possessed this ammunition prior to the crime being committed. Now, you know, people also raised the question. I think it was Mark Lane that first raised this question also when he testified before the commission, about the reliability of the ammunition which was in circulation in 1963. And the Warren report actually addresses this under its speculation and rumor section, which probably holds more true than its actual report itself. But yeah, so this is what the report states. Speculation: ammunition for the rifle found on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository had not been manufactured since the end of World War II. The ammunition used by Oswald must therefore have been at least 20 years old, making it extremely unreliable. Commission's finding: the ammunition used in the rifle was an American ammunition recently made by the Western Cartridge Company, which manufactures such ammunition recently. In tests with the same kind of ammunition, experts fired Oswald's Mannlicher Carcano rifle more than 100 times without any misfires. Well, two people bothered to write to Western Cartridge Company and ask them the question. The first one was Sylvia Mager in 1965. She wrote to Western, and an official got back to her letter. And this is what the official said. The ammunition had once been produced under a government contract, but was no longer available. The manufacturer also stated that, quite frankly, the reliability of the ammunition still in circulation today is questionable. Okay, how can that be if it's just been recently manufactured, according to the commission? Well, this is contained in Mark Lane's rush to judgment. Another correspondence answered by Western Cartridge Company states the following: concerning your inquiry on the 6.5 Mannlicher Carcano cartridge, this is not being produced commercially by our company at this time. Any previous production on this cartridge was made against government contracts which were completed in 1944. So when Mark Lane went before the commission and told them that this ammunition was seriously unreliable and it was questionable and had last been produced in 1944, the commission laughed off his claims basically and printed a falsehood in the report that it was recently made. This is nonsense. And quite frankly, I don't know why the commission never bothered to look this up or look into this matter, because it is a blatant fraudulent thing to print. And it is a fact that the ammunition allegedly used during the assassination was nearly 20 years old at the time of the assassination. So I want to talk about the chain of possession for CE399, which many of us know or have come to know as the magic bullet. Now, CE399 is basically the commission's case. Without CE399, the commission, they can't charge that Lee Harvey Oswald or anyone, any lone gunman, fired and shot at John F. Kennedy. Now, the official chain of custody for the official chain of custody for CE399 is as follows. Okay, a hospital engineer, senior engineer by the name of Darrell C. Tomlinson, found the bullet at Parkland Hospital when he moved a stretcher. This bullet fell out. Okay. Now, Mr. Tomlinson inspected the bullet and gave it to his boss, who was a man by the name of O.P. Wright. Mr. Wright was Parkland's personnel director, and O.P. Wright was actually a retired Dallas police officer. Mr. Wright studied this piece of evidence, and then he sought out a member of the Secret Service to give this piece of evidence over. And that Secret Service agent was a man by the name of Richard E. Johnson. Okay. Special Agent Johnson basically kept this piece of evidence until he got back to Washington later that night. And then he handed it to his boss, who was the chief of the Secret Service, James Rowley. James Rowley, in turn, gave the bullet to a special agent from the FBI, a man by the name of Elmer Lee Todd. And he was of the FBI Washington office. Todd then allegedly marked this bullet and handed it over to Robert Fraser of the FBI Crime Lab. So that is basically the official, sorry, that's my dog barking. That is the official chain of possession for that bullet. So the first thing we would have to take a look at is this. We'd have to try and identify CE399. And we would have to ask the certain witnesses to identify it, the witnesses that were in the chain of possession. The first person up is Darrell Tomlinson. Mr. Tomlinson appeared before the Warren Commission on March the 20th, 1964. Strangely enough, though, Mr. Tomlinson was not shown CE399 during his hearing and was consequently not asked to identify the bullet that he found on the stretcher at Parkland that day. This is very strange behaviour from the Commission because Tomlinson was an important witness to the identification of this key piece of evidence. Well, if we look at Commission Exhibit 2011, this memo would have us believe that on June the 12th, 1964, Darrell Tomlinson was shown CE399. He was shown this bullet by Special Agent Bardwell D. Odom of the FBI. And Tomlinson apparently stated to Odom that the bullet that he was shown appears to be the same one that he found on the hospital carriage at Parkland on November 22nd and handed over to Mr. O.P. Wright. Okay, so let's look at what Mr. O.P. Wright was saying. Strangely enough, O.P. Wright was not called to testify before the commission, which was another strange omission, as he too was an important link in the custody chain pertaining to the identification of CE 399. But then again, according to CE 2011, we find this, that Bardwell D. Odom showed Wright CE 399. And according to this document, Wright said that he couldn't positively identify it as the bullet that he found, but it looked like the bullet that Tomlinson had given him at Parkland. Okay, well, this is quite strange information, because in November 1966, researcher and author of 6 Seconds in Dallas, Josiah Thompson, visited Wright at Parkland Hospital. They got talking, and Thompson basically he basically asked Wright if he would describe the bullet that he handed over to the Secret Service that day. And Wright described the bullet he obtained as having a pointed tip, which is in stark contrast to CE 399, which is a rounded tip. When Thompson showed Wright photographs of CE 399, CE 572, which was comparison bullets from Oswald's alleged rifle, and CE 606, revolver bullets, Wright rejected all of them as resembling the bullet that Tomlinson had found on 11/22/63. In that very instant, Wright actually reached into his drawer and produced for Thompson what he believed the bullet looked like. It was a pointed tip. Because Wright had certain bits of ammunition in his drawer for some reason, this is how he could so readily go into his drawer and produce what he thought the round looked like. Josiah Thompson then stated, almost 30 minutes after this rejection of CE 399, that Wright once again had rejected it as being the bullet that he handed over to the Secret Service that day. There is also further information that the FBI knew that Tomlinson and Wright could not identify CE 399 as the bullet that they found that day. This is a document, and it was a declassified document from 1964, and this was from Gordon Shankland, who was a special agent in charge in Dallas, to J. Edgar Hoover. And this document contains this passage: for information, WFO, neither Darrell C. Tomlinson, who found bullet at Parkland Hospital, or O.P. Wright, personnel officer, Parkland Hospital, who obtained bullet from Tomlinson and gave to special service at Dallas, can identify the bullet. So the FBI knew that neither Tomlinson nor Wright could identify CE 399 as the bullet that they had in their possession that day, which is quite fantastic, because it's quite actually amazing how they could print that in the commission volumes that Tomlinson and Wright said it was the same bullet, but in a declassified document that they buried, it actually states that they couldn't identify the bullet. Well, CE 2011 does actually add to the destruction of the chain of evidence for CE 399, because Richard E. Johnson, who was a Secret Service agent at Parkland, was shown CE 399 by Special Agent Elmer Lee Todd of the FBI. Johnson advised Todd that he could not identify this bullet as the one he had obtained from O.P. Wright and gave to Chief Rowley. So Johnson can identify CE 399 also. Special Agent Elmer Lee Todd then went and showed the bullet to James Rowley, Chief of the Secret Service. Chief Rowley could not identify this bullet, CE 399, as the bullet that he was given to by Richard E. Johnson and gave to Special Agent Elmer Lee Todd on November 22, 1963. So if we have a recap, Tomlinson, Wright, Johnson, Rowley, 4 important links in the custody chain, cannot identify CE 399 as the bullet that they had in possession of that day. Now, The real question is this: why would the prosecution want to try and get this piece of evidence, admit this piece of evidence in a court of law? Why would they want to do it? Because they know to get it into a court of law, they have to call witnesses like Tomlinson, Wright, Johnson, and Rowley, and they would have to testify under oath that this bullet that they found at Parkland was the one the prosecution was presenting as coming from Oswald's gun. And they couldn't do it. So there is no chain of possession for CE 399. They could not get into court. Well, if I was defence counsel, I would actually allow it into court. I wouldn't object. And once it actually got into court, then I would go about destroying it. This piece of evidence, CE 399, is the linchpin, is the linchpin of the commission's case. Without it, they can't charge that Oswald alone killed the president. And this is how important this piece of evidence is. And frankly, it has got no chain of possession in it. Now, one man who did say he could identify the bullet was a man by the name of Elmer Lee Todd. He said that he identified CE 399 because of his markings on the bullet. Well, a man by the name of John Hunt, who was a very respected Kennedy researcher, went to the National Archives. And he went to the National Archives because he wanted to know and see if Elmer Lee Todd's markings were on the historical CE 399. So off John Hunt goes, and he gets the bullet, and he takes photographs a quarter clockwise turn, so the whole circumference of the bullet is photographed. What he found was this: there is 3 markings present on the historical CE 399, which sits in the National Archives today. Each marking on these bullets consists of the initials RF for Robert Fraser, CK for Charles Killen, and JH. Now, JH confused John Hunt because he didn't actually know who JH was. He had a phone conversation with Robert Fraser, and he confirmed to John Hunt that JH was actually Cortland Cunningham, who was another FBI technician. And basically, Cunningham used the initials JH because CC sometimes gets interpreted as carbon copy, so he used JH. But what the most important piece of information we can obtain from Hunt's work is this: there is no marking on that bullet that sits in the National Archives today. There is no marking from Elmer Lee Todd. But Todd said he marked the bullet and could identify it. So what kind of conclusion can we reach here? Well, it's either Elmer Lee Todd was lying when he said that he could identify the bullet because his initials were on the bullet, or somehow the bullet has been switched, and the bullet that sits in the National Archives today is not the bullet that was shown to these people. But even if that was the case, it doesn't make sense because the men couldn't identify the bullet in the first place. So yeah, so it's quite an astounding piece of astounding piece of evidence, really, CE 399. And if Oswald had lived to stand trial, there is no way that this piece of evidence could only have worked in his favour. Now, I know there's a lot of people like Vincent Bugliosi, for example, who tried to say that because of neutron activation analysis, the bullet CE 399 was scientifically linked to Oswald's rifle. And he actually, during his show trial, when he basically took part in a mock trial of Lee Harvey Oswald with Jerry Spence in London, and Dr. Vincent Gwynn was the person that who was basically champion NAA. Dr. Gwynn was a chemist. I don't know what he knew about bullet lead analysis, but this is what Vincent Bugliosi asked him. He said, if 50 people had fired at Kennedy that day, your science indicates they all must accept Oswald, to which Gwynn agrees. It's a ludicrous statement to make. And for years, NAA was championed as this thing which scientifically links. I think you might have heard defenders of the commission say, you know, science has concluded that that basically 50 people were firing at Kennedy, they all missed, and the gun was used in the assassination because it's scientifically linked to the bullets, and it was to the exclusion of any other gun that this bullet was fired from, and all this nonsense. Well, neutron activation analysis has been debunked as a debunked practice. Eric Randich and Patrick Grant, who are metallurgists and statisticians, have debunked Gwyn's work. Cliff Spiegelman, William Tobin, also they were a group of doctors and scientists. They have also debunked Gwyn's work, and they've got fantastic, actually fantastic articles online about this. In fact, if I can just quote from the Spiegelman introduction to his work, and it says, "The assassination of President John F. Kennedy traumatized the nation. In this paper, we show that the evidence used to rule out a second assassin is fundamentally flawed." So NAA, the FBI don't even use it anymore. NAA also, so it is a debunked practice. The best that we can say about CE-399 is that it has not been scientifically linked to the alleged assassination weapon, and it's got witness identification problems that go along with it also. Tony, how long have I got left?
Well, we're just gone 3 o'clock. I think you probably started, I'd say, about 10 past 3. So you've still got another 5 or 10 minutes if you want to go ahead.
Well, what I'll do is I'll talk about the palm print on the rifle. How about that? Yeah,
brilliant. Yeah.
I'll talk about the palm print on the rifle, okay? So, if I can just get this up here. Basically, I know a lot of people charge that Oswald was guilty because that his palm print was somehow found on the rifle. Now, the palm print itself, the prosecution would have tried to get admitted into a court of law. On the surface, okay, the palm print is incriminating evidence against Oswald. Okay, this discovery of it would lend credence to the charge that Oswald had somehow came into contact with the rifle prior to 11/22/63. Although the palm print on the rifle doesn't actually prove that he actually fired the weapon on 11/22/63. Okay, so the first thing that I would try and establish if I was a defense counsel is the authenticity of the evidence. Okay, and I would have tried to have went about by asking Carol Day, who was the man who found the palm print allegedly, if he had taken any photographs of the palm print on the rifle. And obviously the answer to that is no, he never took any photographs of the palm print on the rifle. So there is actually no physical evidence of this palm print on the rifle. Okay. Now, a photograph of a lift is taken to safeguard against the possibility of losing it. FBI fingerprint expert Sebastian Latona testified to this. He said primarily a recommendation in the FBI is simply every procedure to photograph and then lift. Okay, so the absence of any photograph of the palm print on the rifle is even more striking when we learn that Lieutenant Day attended an advanced latent print school conducted in Dallas by the FBI. So it's actually quite incredible. So there is no photographs of the palm print. Now, basically, Day said that he never took photographs of the palm print because he simply ran out of time. He said that that he basically Chief Curry had basically told him to stop what he was doing with the rifle and go no further with processing it. And he relayed these orders to Day shortly before midnight. But Day said that he first came across the palm print on the rifle at 9 p.m. or thereabouts. So basically, Day had 3 hours between 9 p.m. and 12 p.m. when Curry gave him the orders to photograph this palm print on the rifle, and he never did so. So this would have been obviously important, and Day would have knew this, that this would have been important evidence in any trial of Oswald. When Day was producing this palm print evidence, they would have asked him why no photographs of the print exist, and he would have had no answer, no reasonable answer anyway to counter it. So also about the fingerprints and the palm prints, okay? Basically, when they handed over the rifle, he handed it over to an FBI agent called Vincent T. Drain. Now, Drain transferred the rifle to Washington on the night of the 23rd, on early morning 23rd. Okay, they never told Drain that there was a palm print on the rifle. Okay, now they even told the commission during his testimony that he recognized the palm print as belonging to Oswald. Okay, now they knew that the FBI were going to take the rifle and they were going to print and they were going to look for fingerprints on that rifle. Okay, now they is sitting there with a palm print that he suspects comes from Oswald, and he never releases to the FBI this information. Or he even tells Drain, oh, I found a palm print and this is where to look for it. He never told them anything like that, which is a strange omission. A strange omission. Well, another thing that was pretty strange was this. Basically, they claimed, okay, that so no one actually can independently collaborate the authenticity of the lift, because they claimed he was alone when he lifted the palm print on the rifle. Okay, now Captain Fritz was asked on Saturday, November the 23rd, if Oswald's prints were found on the rifle, and he said, no sir, they were not. Okay, Curry likewise made no mention of this important discovery to the media. In fact, the first mention of the palm print discovered on the rifle was announced on the 24th, and that was by Dallas D. Henry Wade. And Mark Lane actually said that Wade was guilty of not one single accuracy during that statement. The rifle at this time was back in Washington, and Oswald was, of course, murdered. They allegedly informed Fritz and Curry on the day of the president's murder that he had found a palm print on the rifle, which allegedly was used in the killing of the president, and that he had tentatively identified the palm print as coming from the main suspect, Lee Oswald. With this powerful information in their arsenal, Fritz, Curry, nor Wade, who were guilty of making fraudulent and prejudicial statements of fact against the accused, stated not once to the various reporters and to the television cameras, which carried their statements everywhere, that there was an existence of Oswald's palm print and it was indeed found on the rifle. So they must have shown a ridiculous restraint that they had never shown before to withhold this piece of information. And in fact, this Oswald's rights and how he was treated at the hands of the Dallas police was commented on by a few attorneys. And one of these attorneys was a guy called Percy Foreman. And this is what Foreman stated. Authorities are running a serious risk of jeopardizing their case against Oswald by failing to observe his constitutional rights. Officials may have already committed irreversible error in the case by permitting the accused to undergo more than 24 hours of detention without the benefit of legal counsel. As grounds for reversal, Foreman stated, under recent decisions of the United States Supreme Court, federal procedural guarantees must be observed in state prosecutions. Their abridgment, he said, can be grounds for a reversal of even a conviction. This is a new law. They could get a conviction in Texas and get it thrown out on appeal, but it takes a long time for these dim-witted law enforcement officials to realize it. So yeah, so there you have it. Oswald's rights were being infringed everywhere you look at it, and the Dallas Police and Prosecution's Office was releasing fraudulent information about the accused, and they keep back the most important piece of evidence they can against them. It doesn't make any sense at all. In fact, there is no evidence that the palm print was ever on the rifle, and I don't believe there ever actually was. Now, the commission actually had serious questions and serious reservations about this late arriving palm print as well. In a memo dated the 26th of August 1964 from the FBI regarding this point stated, there was a serious question in the minds of the commission as to whether or not the palm impression which has been obtained by the Dallas Police Department is a legitimate latent print impression removed from the rifle barrel, or whether it was obtained from some other source. For this matter still needs resolved. Now, during his what do you call it? Basically, when the rifle came to Washington also, okay, it was inspected. It was tested for prints by FBI hair and fiber expert Tom Stolbaugh, who examined the rifle. Stolbaugh stated, "I noticed immediately upon receiving the gun that this gun had been dusted for later fingerprints prior to my receiving it. Latent fingerprint powder was all over the gun." Okay. But what Mrs. Sylvia Mager actually states in her book is this: how could powder survive on the gun from Dallas to Washington, but every single trace of powder and the dry ridges which were present around the palm print on the gun barrel under the stock vanish? You know, so as I've said, there is no evidence that there was this palm print on the rifle. And in fact, in his book, Reasonable Doubt, Henry Hurt actually spoke to Vincent T. Drain, the man who took the evidence to Washington. And this is what Drain told him: "I just don't believe there ever was a print." He noted there was an increasing pressure on the Dallas police to build evidence in the case. Asked to explain what might have happened, Agent Drain stated, "All I can figure out is this: Oswald's print was some sort of cushion because they were getting a lot of heat by Sunday night. You could take the print off Oswald's card and put it on the rifle." Something like that happened. So yeah, so I think I'm probably out of time now, but there's other things that I've not mentioned. Obviously, the paper bag and its construction. There's the paper bag is very dubious, and if you want to know anything more about the paper bag, read Ian Griggs's book, No Case to Answer. I touch upon it in my work on Dave O'Brien's book also. And if there's a presentation by Ian Griggs online, the paper bag that ever was, and Ian takes you through all the problems with this. But the bottom line with the paper bag is there is absolutely no evidence that exists that this paper bag was ever present around that 6th floor window after the assassination. It doesn't appear in any photographs. And yeah, so I hope you guys have enjoyed what I've got to say. I'm sorry it's been really condensed. It's just I'm trying to fit in so much things. But yeah, if you've got any questions, fire away. I'm happy to answer them.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot. That was terrific. You may not have heard it, but I saw an awful lot of people applauding at the end of that. So brilliant presentation. I learned a lot from that. Forgive me, everybody. I have muted a few people just because a little bit of background noise. So what I'm going to ask you to do is if you want to unmute yourself. Yes, I unmuted you, Bart. Yes, I unmuted you. Yeah, I muted you. Yeah. So if you want to unmute yourself and please ask any questions or any comments, now's the time to do it. I heard, just while we're waiting, I heard, forgive me if I'm wrong, that somebody made an allegation that people went to visit the dead body of Lee Harvey Oswald one night. Yeah, that's correct. Paul Grudy, who was he was the director of the funeral home, claims that the FBI agents or agents came. He said, I listened to this during the Man Who Killed Kennedy series. He was interviewed and he said that basically they went into the room with Oswald when Grudy was prepping him for burial, and when they left, there was fresh there was fresh ink on his fingers and palm as well. And Grudy, this annoyed Grudy because he actually had to apparently scrub the fresh ink off his fingers.
As depicted in JFK by Stone.
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was. Yeah, that's correct.
Excellent presentation, Johnny. Really enjoyed that.
Thanks, mate. Thank you.
There was also that peculiar anomaly when you were talking about the Klein's rifle order and the money order that Oswald allegedly sent, because of course there was that nonsense that the money order was bought in one post office. This is while he was out of work, while the records don't show he was out of work. It was bought in one post office, in the central one, and then it was actually posted from Zone 12, wasn't it, which was several miles away across the Trinity River.
That's
You know,
correct.
so why would you do that? So in order to make the 12 o'clock departure from Love Field, which would enable it to get to Chicago the following day.
That's right. Aye, that's right. I think Jim Eugenio says that actually the money order, it was deposited at the Bank of Chicago within 24 hours. And he says this is ludicrous. This never happens. In fact, I think it was in Martha Moyer's book, her article. I think it states that there was never actually any money taken from the money order. There was no money taken for the actual purchase of the rifle also. And the revolver as well is an interesting one, because the revolver actually, it was a thing where it was a receipt on delivery. It was, you had to basically pay the postmaster for the revolver when he was delivering it, and if you never paid him the money, then he would take it right back. Where's the evidence that it was ever paid for on delivery? It's just, yeah.
The revolver was tossed to Lee Oswald inside the Texas Theater. All right. End of debate.
Yeah, I spoke to our mutual friend Greg Parker at length on this, and there's a newspaper clipping dated the 23rd of November 1963, and it's an interview with MacDonald, and MacDonald actually signs the bottom of the article, and MacDonald states that as he approaches Lee Harvey Oswald, okay, he has his gun ready for anything coming in. Okay, now if MacDonald approached Oswald with his gun at the ready and Oswald tried to pull his revolver, MacDonald would have shot him and killed him. So Oswald never went for any revolver. What I think happened, and it's speculation, I think MacDonald approached Oswald with his gun drawn, and I think Oswald acted out of self-preservation and they started tussling over it. I think that's what could have maybe happened. But yeah, I don't think Oswald ever owned this revolver or owned the rifle. There is no evidence that he ever did so, and there's no evidence that he ever held any ammunition for it. I mean, it's not a. It's a.
You know, it's a great. I'll give you a great giveaway because I'm writing about it. But anyway, in his rooming house in Beckley, according to Bill Alexander, now, when they went to Beckley, they went in quite heavy-handed with some serious people in there. And Alexander was one of them. And this is where they apparently found a holster, okay? This is a door. This is a room that couldn't be locked, first of all. Yeah, it couldn't be locked. This is a room where the landlady was in at many various times. This is a room where kids could play in because it was right next to the communal room and so forth. And he had, apparently, according to Bill Alexander, the gun holster was hanging off the doorknob in the room where Oswald apparently was staying. The whole holster thing, right, never been tested for fingerprints, nothing. It just appeared all of a sudden as evidence, and that was it, basically. It was never shown to Oswald. And so the whole thing with the holster itself is already putting a serious doubt on it. And on top of that is the newspaper article, or it was a magazine article, where they interviewed Gus Rose, who was one of the first detectives to talk to him. Him and Stovall talked to Oswald before Fritz took over. And he was asked, and basically Gus Rose said at that interview that Oswald had said that the gun was tossed at him. Then that's never been relayed anywhere else whatsoever, except there's an HSCA, is an interview by Earl Goltz, who used to work for the Dallas Morning News. And he spoke with Applin. And Applin said that he saw the gun in a copper's hands before it went down towards Oswald. He said he saw it before then. And basically it was just a throwaway gun. It was a piece of shit anyway. Yeah. And it was sent to England to be amended and so forth. But there's two. I thought the whole Gus Rose interview, there was the first instance that I ever heard of it. And I think the interview is about 10 or 15 years old. And I thought that was quite surprising, that he mentioned that, because I just couldn't figure it out. And then on top of that, when you start looking into the Beckley bit, about the ownership of the gun, because also, this is the funny thing, when the landlady was asked about the gun by Joachim Houston, one of the first interviewers there, she totally flatly denied that it was possible to have a gun in that room whatsoever. And also, there's barely any storage space anyway, so, you know, and they were sniffling through his drawers and all that. And then all that commie literature they found there as well, it's all complete bollocks.
I've been in the rooming house. In fact, one of the things the woman who owns the rooming house now, Patricia Hall, gets you to do it is to kneel on the bed and to put your arms out, and you can actually touch both walls. It's that small, the rooming house. So yeah, there is no way to hide anything. And yeah, I did read that quite a while ago, that if I can't remember what her name was for the life of me. That was the landlady of the rooming house, but yeah, she said that there was no way he would have had a revolver in there because they searched his possessions at the start. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think he ever, and this is the essence of the case, really. Ownership of the revolver, ownership of the rifle. I mean, even if you take the backyard photographs, for example, okay, people will argue that this is evidence that Oswald had possession of the rifle. I'd counter that by saying there is no way to determine if that is the same rifle or not. But even at that, if this went to a court of law, okay, the backyard photographs couldn't be used because the only witness to the backyard photographs is Marina Oswald. She was the only one there, apparently. And under Texas law, a wife cannot testify against her husband. It's called the marital privilege law. So that in a court of law, the backyard photographs could not have been used. Doesn't prove anything anyway, because it doesn't prove one way or another if Oswald shot at the president. But yeah, it's
there's more to determine ownership of the rifle, and the paperwork wasn't ready yet, so they had a picture instead, and the picture speaks 1,000 words. So boom. Yeah.
But see, that's the thing though. Like there was other versions of the photograph turning up as well. One was found in the Des Moines Shields garage and stuff like that as well. And yeah, and Marina could never say how many photographs she'd taken. It was 1, then it was 2, then it was 3, and then obviously she didn't know how to work the camera and stuff like that as well. So yeah, I don't put much credence in the. I don't put much credence in the credibility in the backyard photographs.
But didn't Marina positively identify the rifle with a phrase which sounds in no way coached? This is fateful rifle of Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, no. I mean, what happened with Marina was this. I mean, the commission did have objections to using her, and so did the HSCA. The commission used her out of necessity. But there was a lot of people like the HSCA that just didn't want to use her. In fact, the HSCA compiled a report called Marina Oswald Porter, Statements of a Contradictory Nature, and the report is 29 pages long. You Google it and you can read it. She was contradicting herself left, right, and centre, and yeah, she was she definitely perjured herself, whether it was for fear of being deported or whether it was for money. Because she was getting a lot of donations in as well. We will never know, and she obviously had her own reasons, but it doesn't make it right what she did. She basically perjured herself to bury her husband as the lone killer.